I don't know if we're in a full-on critical situation right now or not, but let's just have everybody sit down for a little bit and have a friendly, nice little talk about the current state of the DCU. Not all the overreactions, not the DCU is already over tweets, just let's have a normal discussion, because right now, it feels like everyone is either acting like this universe is already dead, or pretending everything is perfectly fine. And the truth is, usually between two extremes, somewhere in the middle. And I'll be honest up front, I haven't even watched Supergirl yet. I'm going to, and I already know it's not as bad as people are making it out to be. I've seen superhero movies from the 90s, the early 2000s, the 2020s, even stuff that came out in the 2010s that people are conveniently forgetting about right now because they consider that era, especially for Marvel, perfect. So when I see people acting like this is a 1 out of 10 disaster film, I'm not buying it. At worst, I'm expecting something in that 6 out of 10, maybe 7 out of 10 if I'm lucky range, maybe flawed, maybe messy, but still watchable. Especially when you look at what's actually in the movie. At least from the trailers, the fight scenes look solid, the visuals, while not one-to-one to the comic, and that still is a travesty, for the most part look pretty good. Millie Alcock looks like she fits the role. Jason Momoa as Lobo, I mean, come on, that alone should be at least entertaining, even if he has no plot significance, because he wasn't even in the original source material. But there are certain baseline things here that are just kinda hard to completely mess up. The interesting thing is what this movie represents for the DCU moving forward, because when you actually step back and look at it, Supergirl feels more like a reality check, and honestly, it was one that the DCU probably needed. If you look at the source material that this movie is pulling from, it was always going to be a difficult adaptation, an uphill battle. This is one of those stories that almost feels designed for a different format, something like a limited animated series, maybe even something akin to Arcane. I know that had 2 seasons, but visually, can you imagine? But let's not get into that discussion because all of us are gonna get really depressed, but that probably would have been perfect, having a 6-7 episode animated series. You get time, you get space to breathe, you can dedicate entire episodes to specific issues, even though it would be better to have at least 2 adapted in 1 episode, but it would allow you to actually let the emotional beats land and build things up properly instead of compressing everything into 1.5 or 2 hours. I don't know how long the film is, all I know is that it's just too short to adapt something like this and have it done properly. Because the real issue is that this is a movie, you're putting it into a movie and you need time. You're taking a story that had multiple layers and it was already building off an existing comic universe. Now you're asking a general audience, a lot of whom barely know who Supergirl is, to catch up instantly. You can't do that, so now you have to go into Supergirl lore and things of that nature. You have to build off the previous film, right? And that takes time, runtime, very valuable runtime to do all of these things, to answer previous questions from the Superman movie of last summer. That's a completely different challenge. Comic readers come in with built-in context. They already understand the world, the tone, the character, and they understand differing tones between even the same character in their publication history, because Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow from, 2022 or 1 or 3, whenever that was, is tonally different completely from the current 2025 Supergirl ongoing run, but it still references the previous work. It's all a part of her history. Most people watching this probably either vaguely remember the CW version or don't remember it at all. So now the film has to introduce the character, establish the world, tell a complete story, and still try to hit the big moments from the source material all within that limited runtime. That's a lot to ask. And when you stack that upon budget constraints, because let's be real, Warner Brothers is not in the position to start throwing unlimited money at a Supergirl project, it starts to make sense why certain things might feel compressed or slightly off. None of that though excuses flaws, but it does explain them. And this is where things start getting a bit more interesting because the conversation around this movie has been way louder than the movie itself. We've got review bombing, we've got people calling it terrible without really explaining why. We've got the usual wave of bad faith criticism like misogyny mixed in with actual valid points. And then on the other side of that spectrum, we've got people overreacting and acting like any criticism at all is hate. So now the movie isn't a movie anymore, it's more of a narrative. We're seeing it on Twitter, on Instagram, on Reddit, everywhere. And that narrative is starting to take shape in how people see the entire DCU. Now here is the real question. Where does the DCU actually go from here? And I don't think one movie decides that, not even close. Peter Safran, one of the big studio executives of DC, already acknowledged the underperformance, which honestly is a bit of a good sign. It means they're paying attention, they're aware of the perception, the reactions, and the online discourse of all of it. These aren't executives who are completely disconnected from the audience. If anything, they might be a little too tapped in. James Gunn, maybe, I know everyone's been saying this, but maybe, well, right now you've been a bit okay, but before, you were a bit too tapped in on, Twitter threads, you were always on there. But they know now that this movie isn't a 1 out of 10 though. They know there's valid criticism mixed into all of that noise, but more importantly, they know that this isn't the project that defines the entire universe. But what does matter is the pattern we're starting to see. If you look at the first stretch of the DCU, there's a very clear trend. The strongest projects so far have one thing in common, well, because they're the only projects that have been made other than Supergirl, is that James Gunn was the head of it. Creature Commandos, Superman, Peacemaker, all projects where Gunn had heavy creative control, writing, directing, or both. And even when those projects weren't perfect, they were at least consistent. They had a clear voice, a clear identity, and you could tell that someone had a vision behind them. The problem with all of this is that James was connected to 3 projects, 2 of them being shows, so that made the quality of all of his work suffer a little bit, but the fact that all of them were watchable and had really great moments, great episodes, and for the most part they were either solid, serviceable, or pretty good, tells you the talent that he has if he was focusing on one project. And the crazy thing is that Supergirl is one of those projects that I think James Gunn will put a really good stamp on. You can already tell that he's already read the source material, so there isn't any further background knowledge that he needs. He probably already had an idea of what he wanted the film to be in his head already, but of course he wants to pass it off to other people because he doesn't have the time. The space opera epic, he has an advantage because he's done it before with Guardians. Not to make that comparison because from what I've seen, they are really different, but even in the trailer, you can tell that this movie is very reliant on needle drops, and who do we know uses needle drops more than anybody and made it a staple in the superhero medium? James Gunn. He's put a lot of us, especially as young kids, into some very good playlist bangers that's still on our Spotify. Anyways, compare that to what happens when that influence isn't as direct. Now, obviously James Gunn had a hand in the film. He was there every step of the way and he was at least monitoring what they were doing. He saw what Greg was doing and he had discussions with him, but he doesn't want to overstep his boundaries, and that is Greg Giuseppe's project. But I think this is where things started to feel a little bit uncertain. People weren't thinking the way that they do right now last year. And I think this is where the uneasiness is coming from. This is the real first stretch where the DCU has to prove something. Can it function without James Gunn doing everything himself? That's the real test. Right now, it feels like he is like a safety net, the guy you can trust to make sure everything lands properly. But he can't write and direct every single project. That is not sustainable eventually. The DCU has to rely on its system, its structure, its ability to maintain quality across different creators. And that's where things are starting to get a little shaky, especially when you look at the slate. On paper, it sounded very exciting and different to me. It was risky in a good way, focusing on smaller characters, mixing movies and shows, trying to build a universe that doesn't just follow the Marvel blueprint, and I get the appeal of that. But now that we're actually seeing it play out, it feels less like a structured plan and more like a collection of ideas that are here and there. Some of these projects feel like announcements that came out before they fully figured out what they were doing. We've already seen delays, projects going quiet, others getting pushed to the side, and that creates uncertainty because if the audience doesn't know what's coming next in a couple years or doesn't feel confident in it, they're not going to stay invested. And that's the part where I think DC might have overcorrected. In trying to be different from Marvel, they might have moved away from the one thing that actually worked: clear foundations. Say what you want about the early MCU, they had a very simple plan: build up some core Avengers characters, bring them together, go from there. It wasn't perfect, a lot of it was being figured out in real time, experiential learning, but the audience always understood the direction, and that clarity matters more than people think. Right now, the DCU is trying to do a lot at once: introduce new characters to audience members who don't even know who they are, experiment with tone, which I think they should keep, balance movies and shows, rebuild audience trust, and that is a very difficult balancing act, especially when you don't have multiple guaranteed hits already securing your foundation. At the moment, everything is kind of leaning on Superman, and while I will applaud them for doing that because Superman should be the central figure of the DC universe, you want multiple pillars: Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Flash, characters that can carry momentum on their own so the entire universe doesn't feel like it lives or dies based on one release. And now, we are relying heavily on Man of Tomorrow, the Superman 2 sequel, on doing well. And while I do think it will do well considering the very positive reception to the behind-the-scenes footage, the notion of having a lot of different DC characters, even some new ones, in one movie, while also having Brainiac, a Superman villain that's never been adapted in live action before, at least from a movie standpoint, be the main villain, I don't see that happening, but again, to reiterate, it is a real worry. And on top of all of that, the audience itself has changed. I started thinking, maybe the audience might be the biggest problem for the DCU, because back when the MCU was building up, most people weren't analyzing every detail, they weren't comparing adaptations frame by frame, they weren't deep in online discussions and discourse, breaking down every decision. Now everyone has an opinion, everybody wants to be a critic, everyone has their definitive version of these characters, and if something doesn't match that, the reaction is immediate and loud. No matter how valid it is, it's always going to create discourse of people who agree and disagree, which makes building a universe like this way harder than it used to be, because now you're not just making movies, you're navigating expectations, narratives, and a fan base that is a lot less forgiving than it was 10 to 15 years ago. And also, we have to remember that these people are they're traumatized because a lot of their adaptations were so badly done that it ruined the cultural zeitgeist. The way that people view these characters like Superman is worse because of that previous DC extended universe. Man of Steel, even though I do enjoy the film, and Batman v Superman made people think that Superman was boring, among a lot of other things, because Ezra Miller's Flash, for example, was some people's first interaction with the character. Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman was a lot of people's first interaction with Wonder Woman, as sad as that sounds. So having that as the version you see in your head, I can understand why a lot of normies don't like the DC universe. And I think this is the part that gets lost in a lot of these conversations. The DCU isn't failing right now, but it also hasn't proven itself yet. It's in that awkward middle stage of building where everything matters a little more than it should. Every reaction feels amplified and every mistake gets treated like a sign of something bigger. That doesn't mean it's over, it just means the margin of error is smaller. What matters now isn't whether Supergirl is a 6 or 7 out of 10, what matters is what they do next. Do they tighten the structure? Do they focus on building out those core characters? Because at the end of the day, people don't stick around for potential, they stick around for consistency. That's why the Marvel Cinematic Universe did well for 3 whole phases, 10 years, a whole decade of people's lives. And right now, that's the one thing the DCU hasn't fully earned yet, the consistency, the reliance, the belief that if I go to this movie, it at least is going to be enjoyable and for the most part, good, hopefully a 7 out of 10. That is not there. That is what they need. They need these films, they need these pillars, because with all of these side projects focusing on the smaller characters, you're going to need 2, 3, and I'm being generous, 2 to 3 really good films, smaller tier films like Clayface, that get a lot of good word of mouth, that eventually they can make it up to close to $1 billion, if not $1 billion itself. Marvel back in the day, they built this structure, and this is why I praise Kevin Feige so much, and a lot of us kind of forget what he did. For those first 3 phases, he really made it feel like light work, and the fact that he connected every film, he made it so that every film felt like you needed to watch it, that it was the next step of the Infinity Saga. So even films that people didn't like, that people thought were bad, like Captain Marvel, for example, a movie that I don't even hate that much, and it's not exactly good, but it's not that bad. I take that back. It's 4 out of 10. But in general, it made $1 billion either way. It had people watching it back to back to back because of the post-credit scenes to analyze it for their YouTube videos. That is how you make hype in a universe that will have people and fans coming back for more again and again. Unfortunately, they did kind of ruin it after Endgame and their break in 2020, and then when they came back in 2021, Disney Plus came in to oversaturize everything. But it really makes me think that DC should have stuck with that Marvel method for that first phase, build up to a Justice League film, then in phase 2, you can do all this crazy stuff that you want to do after you get that trust. We can't go back now, but if I were to start over, that is what I would do. So again, they haven't earned it yet, that trust, but it's also the one thing that can fix everything, almost everything, if they get it right. Build back that trust, everything else will follow. You'll have normies running to the theater to watch your movie about the question. It can happen, you just have to build everything out correctly. But yeah guys, let me know down below, what do you think is the major problem with the DCU? What would you do to fix it? Have you been enjoying it so far? I have. I really enjoyed Superman 2025 despite its changes to the source material, because I realized that not everything is going to be one-to-one, and adaptations are meant to take risks and create different versions of the characters that you know. All I gotta do is keep the core tenets of their characterization. The story, the background can be changed, but there has to be a good reason for it. Now, I won't say it had the greatest of reasons, but it's a bit too early to call that yet. Anyways, let me know down below. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications so you know when a new video goes live. And yeah, see you all later. Take care. Deuces. Peace.